She was just 18. Bright smile, big dreams, and a life that had only just begun. But on a quiet night in Irvine, California, everything changed. He had vanished for 5 years, silent, waiting, and when he returned, he took one final victim. This is the story of Janelle Cruz, the last known name on the list of the Golden State Killer. A case that would remain cold for decades until a speck of DNA spoke louder than any scream ever could.
In the quiet farmlands of Bath, New York, a boy named Joseph James DeAngelo was born in 1945. His early years were marked by instability, military moves, and family dysfunction. Reports from relatives and neighbors later suggested that Joe had witnessed traumatic scenes in his childhood, including seeing his sister assaulted, incidents that may have shaped the darkness he carried into adulthood. By the time his family moved to California, DeAngelo was already showing signs of violent tendencies. He was intelligent and disciplined, which led him to join the U.S. Navy and serve during the Vietnam War. After returning home, he enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminal justice, and later joined law enforcement as a police officer. On paper, he was a protector. In reality, he was planning his reign of terror. The irony of his police background cannot be overstated. DeAngelo used his knowledge of investigative procedures to outsmart law enforcement. He knew how officers thought, how they approached crime scenes, and how to avoid leaving traces. It gave him a disturbing edge, and for years, it worked. His crimes began with petty burglaries in the early 1970s in Visalia, California, under the name the Visalia Ransacker. He would break into homes, rifle through belongings, and steal items of little value. These break-ins, though seemingly minor, laid the groundwork for something much more sinister. Soon, the crimes escalated. He became known as the East Area Rapist when, in Sacramento County, he began attacking women in their homes. He wore a ski mask, carried a flashlight, and often stalked his victims before striking. He tied up his victims and assaulted them repeatedly, whispering terrifying threats. It wasn't just about the act, it was about control, fear, and domination. Couples became his next target. In a horrifying escalation, he would bind both partners, then place plates or glasses on the male's back. He warned that if he heard the sound of dishes falling, he would kill them both. Then he would assault the woman just feet away from her partner, enforcing a psychological torment that lingered for a lifetime. Law enforcement was baffled. They had never seen anything like him. He would strike, then vanish, sometimes returning to taunt victims with phone calls. Communities were gripped by fear. Families slept with weapons under their pillows. Some even moved away, unable to handle the anxiety. The killer then changed locations and identities. He became the original Night Stalker in Southern California, where the crimes intensified into murder. His victims now included couples who were bludgeoned to death, often in their beds. The brutality was extreme. There were no signs of forced entry, and often no one heard a thing. His spree covered at least 13 confirmed murders, 50 sexual assaults, and over 120 burglaries between 1974 and 1986. The true numbers may be higher. His known victims ranged from teenage girls to elderly couples. No one was safe. He was a phantom, always one step ahead. For years, his identity remained a mystery. Multiple sketches were drawn, hundreds of suspects were questioned. DNA was collected and tested. But Joseph James DeAngelo, hiding in plain sight as a father, husband, and retired police officer, continued his quiet suburban life. He even raised children and blended into the neighborhood like any other aging man. So what motivated him? Experts believe a combination of early childhood trauma, an obsessive need for control, and possible sadistic personality traits were at play. He was methodical, organized, and deeply manipulative. He didn't just want to harm, he wanted to dominate, to own his victims' fear. Unlike many killers who seek attention, DeAngelo thrived in the shadows. He left clues that went nowhere, made prank calls that led to dead ends, and taunted police with how close he always was. He was playing a game, one where he always felt he was the master. But over time, he stopped. In 1986, after the murder of 18-year-old Janelle Cruz, he vanished. There were no more attacks. No letters, no calls. It was as if the Golden State Killer had disappeared into thin air. And for decades, that's exactly what the world believed. As true crime authors and amateur sleuths began piecing together the crimes, a composite of the monster emerged. Still, his name remained hidden. It wasn't until the advent of forensic genealogy in the 2010s that the truth would finally surface. In 2018, investigators matched DNA from old crime scenes to a distant relative of DeAngelo's through a public genealogy website. This groundbreaking method led them to him. A sample was collected from something as ordinary as a discarded tissue. The results were undeniable. Joseph James DeAngelo was arrested at the age of 72. Neighbors were stunned. He had lived among them as a grumpy old man with a motorcycle. No one knew the atrocities he had committed. When confronted, he muttered one sentence: "I did all those things." His arrest shook the country. Survivors, many now in their 60s and 70s, wept in court. Families of the victims finally had answers. After more than 4 decades, the boogeyman had a name, a face, and a prison sentence. This wasn't just the story of a killer. It was the story of hundreds of lives shattered by one man's sadism. And yet, there was one name that stood as his final mark, a young woman whose death brought an end to the nightmare. Her name was Janelle Cruz. Janelle Cruz was just 18 years old when the monster entered her life. She was vibrant, full of laughter, and like many teenagers, looking forward to the summer ahead. It was May 1986 in Irvine, California, a place far removed from the terror that had once gripped Northern California. Here, people felt safe. That illusion was about to be shattered. Janelle lived with her family in a modest suburban home. Her parents were out of town that week, vacationing in Mexico. She had recently had braces removed, was working part-time, and dreaming about the future, maybe college, maybe modeling. She had no idea that she had caught the attention of a predator who had eluded justice for over a decade. In the days leading up to her murder, it's believed that DeAngelo had been stalking her. His pattern was consistent. He would watch his victims, learn their routines, and wait for the moment they were most vulnerable. With Janelle's parents away, he saw his opportunity. The house was quiet. There would be no witnesses. On the night of May 4th, Janelle was home alone. There are indications that she may have had friends over earlier in the evening, perhaps just for a few hours. But when the house fell dark and the street settled into silence, he made his move. He likely slipped in through an unlocked window or door, silent, calculated, patient. The attack was brutal. Janelle was raped and then bludgeoned to death. The force of the beating was so severe that her face was nearly unrecognizable. It was rage, pure, unfiltered, personal. But to this day, no one can say why Janelle was chosen. She had no connection to DeAngelo. She simply fit a pattern he'd honed over years of violence. Her body was discovered the next day by a friend. The scene was horrifying. Blood soaked the sheets. The room was in disarray. And the house, eerily, showed no signs of forced entry. Whoever had done this knew what he was doing. He was in and out without a trace, almost. At the time, detectives had no clue that this killing was connected to the unsolved crimes from a decade earlier. The original Night Stalker had been silent since 1981. No one imagined that he would strike again, especially in Irvine. But DNA collected from Janelle's body would later prove the link. Forensic testing in the 2000s confirmed that the same man who had murdered couples in the 70s and early 80s was responsible for Janelle's death. This made her the final known victim of the Golden State Killer, the exclamation point on a terrifying legacy. Her case became the last page in a long, bloody chapter of California history. Janelle's family was devastated. Her mother never recovered from the loss. For years, the family held out hope for answers, but none came. Every tip led nowhere. Every suspect was a dead end. The idea that the killer was still out there, aging, walking free, was a wound that never closed. The years passed, but the case stayed alive in the hearts of detectives and survivors. Janelle's name was spoken in every documentary, every podcast, every book that tried to piece together the crimes. She became a symbol of unfinished business. A reminder that evil doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it waits. In 2018, when James DeAngelo was finally arrested, Janelle's case was one of the first to be re-examined under this new light. The DNA matched her, the timeline fit. And suddenly, after 32 years of mystery, her family had a name to attach to their pain. In court, as DeAngelo sat silent, members of Janelle's family spoke. They told the world who she was, not just a victim, but a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman who had her life stolen before it could begin. There were no dramatic outbursts, just grief, deep, permanent grief. One family member described the last time they saw her. She was laughing, telling stories, excited about life. That memory, they said, is what they've tried to hold on to, even as the horror of that night threatened to drown it out. Janelle Cruz never got justice in the traditional sense. Her killer lived free for over 3 decades, enjoying birthdays, holidays, and the illusion of normal life. But when he was finally caught, it was her story that echoed the loudest. She reminded the world that these crimes weren't statistics, they were people. Her case also marked the evolution of forensic science. It showed how the smallest piece of DNA, preserved through years of technological progress, could speak louder than any witness. It was the thread that unraveled the entire mystery. Now when people speak of the Golden State Killer, they remember Janelle. Not just because she was the last, but because her youth, her innocence, her silenced voice became the haunting final note in a symphony of terror. She was not forgotten. And in the end, her story helped bring a killer down.
Okay, so you know that feeling, right, when you're like really trying to wrap your head around a huge story, one of those things that's been all over the news forever,
Yep.
For years or even decades.
Right.
And you want to like get to the heart of it without drowning in a sea of information.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we're doing here today.
Yeah.
We're taking this deep dive into a case that really, it casts this like long shadow of fear across California.
It did.
For decades.
Yes, for decades.
The hunt for Joseph James DeAngelo.
Right.
And I think one of the things that is so striking right off the bat is just how many names are attached to this guy.
Yeah.
The Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, the original Night Stalker,
Right.
Iran Renz, and then finally the Golden State Killer.
The Golden State Killer, yeah.
Each one of those names represents this like different chapter in this really unsettling story.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like those different names actually tell us a lot about how this whole case was understood, or I guess misunderstood, for so long. Law enforcement was essentially dealing with what looked like separate crimes for years.
Right, separate crime sprees, yeah.
It seemed like, yeah, exactly.
Completely unrelated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our goal today, and we're using the information from Wikipedia on Joseph James DeAngelo.
Okay.
Is that our foundation here is to actually connect those dots for you.
Perfect.
We want to like distill it down
Okay.
to the key info, identify those patterns that emerged over time and trace how this terrifying puzzle was finally solved.
I love it. Okay, so our mission here is not just to kind of rehash the facts, but to really like understand the path this whole case took.
Yeah, the trajectory.
The trajectory.
Yeah.
Focusing on, I think, the most surprising and honestly disturbing parts of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole thing by starting with the early life of the man behind all these really chilling names.
Yeah.
Joseph James DeAngelo was born on November 8th, 1945 in Bath, New York.
Right. And, when we look at cases like this, when we look at the backgrounds of these individuals, it's only natural to look for things that might have contributed in some way.
Yeah.
But it's super important to remember that nothing ever excuses the choices they made.
Right.
So DeAngelo's father was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. He had Italian ancestry. He had 2 older sisters and a younger brother.
Okay.
And then this is where some really disturbing details from his early life come out.
Okay.
There are these allegations that he actually witnessed the rape of his sister
Wow.
while they were living in West Germany. And later on, his sister Rebecca said that he was also abused by their father.
God, that's so heavy. And it's impossible to like draw a straight line from those experiences to his later actions.
You can't say for sure.
But it makes you wonder
It does.
what kind of impact that had.
Absolutely right.
So going on to his education, he went to Mills Junior High School and Folsom High School, where he got his GED.
Okay.
He even played junior varsity baseball.
Like a seemingly, quote unquote, normal upbringing in some ways.
Right.
Yeah.
But then after that, he went on to get an associate degree in police science.
With honors.
With honors.
Yeah.
From Sierra College, and then a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Sacramento State University.
Wow.
And he didn't stop there. He took postgraduate courses and completed police training.
So he was really immersing himself in, the world of law enforcement.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things I think that we see in cases like this sometimes, where the person who commits these crimes is very familiar with the justice system.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They know how it works inside and out.
Yeah.
And they use that knowledge to avoid getting caught.
To their advantage, yeah. Okay, so after his education, he served in the U.S. Navy for 22 months during the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And after that, he went into law enforcement, working for the Exeter Police Department in their burglary unit.
Interesting.
Yeah, from May 1973 to August 1976.
Okay.
Then he went to the Auburn Police Department in August 1976. And this is where we start to see some big red flags pop up.
Yeah, in his professional life.
Yeah, he was fired from the Auburn Police Department in July 1979 for shoplifting.
Shoplifting.
Yeah, a hammer and dog repellent.
Wow, what a combo.
I know. And he got 6 months probation for that.
Okay.
But what's really unsettling is what happened when he was fired.
Yeah, like what went down?
He apparently threatened to kill the police chief and was even accused of stalking the chief's house.
Oh, wow. So this is an officer exhibiting some seriously alarming behavior.
Yeah, I mean, like, way beyond just, like a little bit of misconduct.
Totally.
This is, like, really serious.
Yeah, this is a huge red flag looking back.
Huge, right?
Yeah, maybe a sign of a much deeper problem.
Yeah.
A complete lack of respect for the law.
Yeah. And it wasn't just his professional life. His personal relationships also show this pattern of trying to control people and aggression.
Okay.
So back in May in 1970, he got engaged to Bonnie Jean Colwell. She was a nursing student.
Oh.
But she broke things off in 1971 because he was manipulative and abusive.
Wow, so how did that manifest?
Well, he would demand that she helped him cheat on his exams.
Oh my gosh.
And even worse, after they broke up, he threatened her with a gun and tried to force her to marry him.
That's terrifying. That's a huge escalation.
It is a huge escalation, yeah.
Yeah.
So you would think that would be like the end of his romantic life.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
You would think.
But he married Sharon Marie Huddle in November 1973.
Wow, okay.
And they had 3 daughters together.
Okay.
And they bought a house in Citrus Heights in 1980,
Okay.
which is actually where he was eventually arrested
Oh, wow.
all those years later.
Wow.
His wife, she became a divorce attorney in 1982,
Interesting.
and they separated in 1991 and finally divorced in 2019 after he was arrested.
Okay.
And what's so disturbing is that most of his really awful crimes happened while he was married and raising a family.
Yeah, that's the really chilling part.
His wife and kids, they had no idea about the double life he was living.
It's just mind-blowing how someone can compartmentalize like that.
It is. His eldest daughter even described him as a perfect father.
Really?
Yeah. And his wife, she apparently just accepted his explanations for why he was gone all the time.
Wow, that's one of the most disturbing parts of this whole thing, right?
It is.
This, like, total separation between his public image and his secret life.
Yeah, this like normal facade.
Oh, cool. Right.
And then this horrific reality.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so after he was fired from the police force, he had all kinds of jobs.
Okay.
He was a computer engineer for a bit and then a cashier in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then from 1990 until he retired in 2017, he worked as a truck mechanic at a Save Mart supermarket's distribution center.
Okay, so like a pretty regular job.
Totally, just blending in.
Yeah.
There was even this weird incident in 1996 where he got arrested for not paying for gas.
Really?
Yeah, but the charges were dropped.
Okay.
So even later in life, there were these warning signs.
What kind of warning signs?
His brother-in-law remembers DeAngelo just casually talking about the East Area rapist around the time those crimes were happening.
Oh, wow. So he was bringing it up in conversation.
Yeah, and neighbors said he would have these loud, angry outbursts all the time.
Mm.
And in one really creepy incident, he left a neighbor this threatening voicemail because their dog was barking, and he promised to deliver a load of death.
That's chilling.
It is. And at the time he was arrested, he was actually living with a daughter and a granddaughter.
Oh, wow. So even in retirement, he was still showing these really troubling behaviors.
Totally.
Right.
So we're seeing this guy with a background in law enforcement,
Right.
a history of manipulation and threats in his personal life,
Yep.
and this increasing anger as he gets older,
Uh-huh.
and all while living this seemingly normal life.
It's almost like a textbook case of hiding in plain sight.
It really is. Okay, so this is all the backdrop for the terrifying crimes that he committed over more than a decade.
Right.
We're talking about at least 13 murders, 51 rapes, and 120 burglaries across California.
It's hard to even grasp the scale of that.
I know, and as you said, these weren't all immediately connected. They were seen as these 3 separate things.
The 3 distinct phases.
Right.
With their own nicknames.
Exactly. So let's start with the Visalia Ramsacker.
Okay, so that was 1974 to 1975.
Right.
And most people now think of this as like his early phase where he was kind of testing things out,
Okay.
honing his skills for the more violent crimes that came later.
So these were like his training grounds almost.
In a way, yeah, a
Yeah.
terrifying way.
Yeah.
There might even be connections to other burglaries in Visalia and nearby areas before and after this period.
Really?
Yeah, and it went on for about 20 months.
Wow.
He's thought to be responsible for 1 murder and around 120 burglaries during this time.
Okay.
And get this, even when he was arrested all those years later, the Visalia police chief said that even though they didn't have a direct DNA link back then,
Right.
they had other evidence.
Okay.
And they were sure that they'd finally caught the Visalia ransacker.
So they were confident even without the DNA.
Totally.
Wow.
He was actually formally charged with Claude Snelling's murder in August 2018.
Okay.
but the statute of limitations for the burglaries had run out, so they couldn't charge him with those.
Right.
He ended up pleading guilty to Snelling's murder in 2020.
Okay, so what did these Visalia ransacker burglaries look like?
They started in March 1974,
Okay.
and usually he would break into houses and go through people's things.
Okay.
He often, like, scattered women's underwear around.
Really?
Yeah, and he would steal these weird random things like coins, blue chip stamps, and little personal items.
So not like big, valuable stuff?
No, not... Usually he would often ignore expensive things that were right there in the open.
Interesting. So it was more about the act itself.
It seems like it, yeah.
Okay. And were there any like patterns in the way he broke into these places?
Yeah, he had a real MO.
Okay.
He'd climb fences, try to get in through different spots, especially windows.
Mm-hmm.
He always made sure he had an escape road.
Oh, wow. So he was thinking ahead.
Yeah, very methodical.
Wow.
He would take out window screens, and sometimes he even put things like dishes against doors.
What for?
So they'd make a noise if someone came in and he'd know to run.
That's so creepy.
It is, and he always wore gloves, too.
To avoid fingerprints.
Exact. No fingerprints.
Smart.
Smart.
Yeah. Okay. So this was all about property crime, but then things took a really dark turn.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So in September 1975, there was this guy, Claude Snelling. He was a college professor.
Okay.
He caught DeAngelo trying to kidnap his 16-year-old daughter from their yard.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, Snelling was shot twice, and he died.
That's horrible.
And then the attacker beat up the daughter, too, before running away.
God. And they found a stolen bike nearby.
They did, yeah.
Wow. And then was there another incident with a police officer?
Yeah, in December 1975,
Okay.
this detective, William McGowan, was watching an area where the ransacker had been active.
Right.
And he saw this masked guy.
Okay.
McGowan told him to stop and even fired a warning shot. And the guy acted like he was giving up at first,
Yeah.
but then he pulled out a gunshot McGowan in the leg and ran off.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and he dropped a bag while he was escaping.
What was in it?
Blue chip stamps and a sock full of coins.
The ransacker's signature.
Exactly.
So it seems like this is where he escalated from burglary to violence.
It does, yeah, especially when he was confronted or challenged.
Right, like he was upping the stakes.
Is that?
So it really does seem like Visalia was like this practice run for him.
In a terrifying sense, yeah.
Okay, so then things shifted again in 1976.
Right.
And he became the East Area rapist.
Yep.
So tell me about that.
So he moved to the Sacramento area, and his main thing became rape.
Oh, wow.
And he was focusing on these areas east of the city.
Okay.
The first known rape that we know he did as the East Area rapist was on December 18th, 1976.
Okay.
The victim was only 15 years old.
God.
Her name was Chris Pedretti.
Okay.
She was home alone. And DeAngelo, he had a ski mask on and a knife. And he said this phrase that would become so chilling.
What was that?
Do what I say or I'll kill you and be gone in the dark.
Oh, my God.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And then over 2 hours, he raped her multiple times. He even forced her outside, naked in the cold, and then brought her back in.
That's awful.
It is. And he finally left her tied up and gagged.
God. And to make matters worse, she later said that the police weren't very helpful after the attack.
Oh, no. So she felt like she was victimized all over again.
Exactly.
Wow, that's terrible.
Okay, so how did he operate as the East Area rapist?
He would stalk these middle-class neighborhoods at night,
Okay.
and he'd target women who were alone in one-story houses that were near escape routes.
So like near a park or something?
Yeah, exactly. Parks, creeks, open fields, places like that.
Okay.
People saw him lurking around a lot, but he always got away.
Hmm.
He even shot a young man who tried to chase him.
Oh, wow. He wasn't afraid to use violence.
No, not at all.
Okay.
And investigators think that he would scout out places beforehand.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes he'd even go into the houses before the attack.
To do what?
To unlock windows, unload guns if there were any, and even plant things to tie people up with later.
That's so premeditated.
It's chilling, right?
Yeah.
And he would often call his victims before the attack.
What?
Yeah, sometimes for months.
Like harassing them.
Well, he was trying to learn their routines.
Oh my God, that's so creepy.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so he was targeting women alone at first,
Right.
but then he started attacking couples.
He did, yeah.
Why the change?
Investigators think it was because the media kept saying that he only attacked women who were alone.
So he was like changing his MO based on what he was reading?
It seems like, yeah, like he was almost playing a game.
God!
Yeah.
Okay, so how did he attack these couples?
Okay, so he'd break in, usually through a window or a sliding door.
Okay.
He'd wake them up by shining a flashlight in their faces and pointing a gun at them.
Oh my God.
Then he'd tie them up.
With what?
Often with shoelaces.
From the house?
Sometimes, yeah. Or he'd bring his own. He'd blindfold and gag them, too. Yeah. Using towels or pillowcases that he'd rip into strips.
God, that's terrifying.
It is. And he would tie them up so tight.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And then get this. He would make the woman tie up the man before he tied her up.
What?
Yeah, it was like this twisted ritual.
That's so messed up.
It is. And then he would separate them. He'd put a stack of dishes on the man's back and threaten to hurt them if they made a sound.
Awful.
Yeah. And then he'd take the woman to another room and rape her over and over again.
God, this is so horrific.
There was this one rape in 1978 where he kept saying, "I hate you, Bonnie."
Like his ex-fiancée.
Yeah, it seems like he might have been thinking about her.
Oh, wow.
And he would stay in the house for hours.
Really?
Yeah, he'd go through their things, eat their food, and rape the woman again.
Yeah.
And he'd threaten them the whole time.
It's like he wanted to torture them psychologically as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just unimaginable.
It is.
And how many of these rapes were there?
At least 51 that we know of.
51.
Yeah, across several counties.
Which ones?
Sacramento, Contra, Costa Stanislaus, San Joaquin, Alameda, Santa Clara, and Yolo.
Wow, so this wasn't just a small area.
No, this is widespread.
Okay, so this was all focused on rape, but then he killed a couple, right?
He did, yeah. In February 1978,
Okay.
this young couple, Brian and Katie Major, they were walking their dog in Rancho Cordova, which was near some other East area rapist attacks.
Right.
And someone confronted them on the street. They tried to run, but were chased down and shot dead.
Oh my God.
They found a shoelace nearby.
Yeah.
And investigators always thought it was the East area rapist.
Because of the shoelace.
Yeah, exactly.
And then in 2016, the FBI said they were pretty sure he was responsible.
They did. And DeAngelo eventually confessed to those murders in 2020.
So this was a huge escalation for him.
It was, yeah, going from rape to murder.
Right, and it took years to connect him to it.
Yeah, for sure.
So then what happened?
Well, in late 1979, he moved to Southern California and became the original Night Stalker.
And this is where the violence really ramped up, right?
Oh, absolutely. Murder became his main thing.
Okay.
These attacks were in Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties.
And the last one was in 1986.
Right.
Okay, and in this phase, only one couple survived.
Yeah, just the first couple he attacked in Goleta in October 1979.
And how did they survive?
Well, they actually managed to escape,
Wow.
and that's what alerted the neighbors.
Okay.
But every other victim we know about from this period was killed, either shot or beaten to death.
Oh, God.
He was actually known as the Night Stalker at first.
Before they knew it was the East Area Rapist.
Exactly. But then they figured that out. They changed his name to the original Night Stalker to separate him from Richard Ramirez.
Who was also called the Night Stalker.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through some of these original Night Stalker attacks.
Okay.
The first one in Goleta in October 1979.
Right.
What happened there?
He broke in and tied up this couple.
Okay.
And when he said he was going to kill them, they tried to get away, and the woman started screaming.
Okay, so they fought back,
They did, yeah. And the attacker took off on a bike.
leaving it behind.
Yeah, he left the bike and a knife.
Wow, and someone chased after him?
Yeah, a neighbor who was an FBI agent, actually.
Oh, wow.
But you couldn't catch him.
So close.
I know, right?
Okay, and then the next attack was in December 1979.
Right, also in Goleta.
Okay.
That was when Robert Offerman and Debra Manning were murdered.
Right.
Manning was raped too, and they found her rings hidden near her body. Offerman's hands were untied, so he might have fought back.
Okay.
Neighbors said they heard gunshots.
And the killer ate their food.
Yeah, it looks like he ate some leftover turkey from their fridge.
Wow.
And then he stole a bike from the next door condo.
Okay, so the bike thing is a pattern.
Definitely a pattern.
Okay. And then in March 1980, Charlene and Lyman Smith were killed in Ventura.
Right, they were beaten to death with a log from their own backyard.
Oh, my God.
Charlene was raped too.
And they were tied up?
Yeah, their wrists and ankles were tied with drapery cord.
And the diamond knot?
Yes.
Tied with a diamond knot.
The same knot as the East Area Rapist.
Exactly.
So that's a big connection.
A huge connection, yeah.
And they even called him the Diamond Knot Killer for a while.
They did, yeah, for a little bit.
Wow. Okay, then in August 1980, Keith and Patrice Harrington were murdered in Dana Point.
Right, they were beaten to death too.
Patrice was raped.
Yes, she was, and her face and skull were just crushed.
God, that's brutal.
They were tied up too, but the police didn't find the weapon or what he used to tie them. They'd only been married 3 months.
Oh, wow. That's so sad.
It is. And Keith's brother, Bruce, he became a big advocate for DNA collection in California because of this.
We're trying to make sure this wouldn't happen to other families.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next year, in February 1981, Manuela Withun was killed in Irvine.
Right. She was raped and murdered in her own home.
And there were signs she'd been tied up.
Yeah.
God. And her husband was in the hospital at the time.
He was, yeah, so she was alone.
And what's really sad is that the police and the neighbors suspected her husband at first.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it wasn't until 2008 that they cleared him with DNA evidence.
So he lived for years under suspicion.
He did. Yeah, he struggled with alcoholism. His second marriage fell apart. It was just tragic.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
Okay, and then in July 1981, Chiraido Domingo and Gregory Sanchez were killed in Goleta.
Right, they were attacked in Domingo's house.
Yeah, okay.
Sanchez might have fought back because the killer used a gun.
Okay.
Domingo was raped and beaten to death, and there were bruises that looked like she'd been tied up, but they couldn't find the restraints.
Wow.
They did find some shipping twine nearby, though.
Okay.
And the police looked into whether there was a connection to a painter who'd been working at a shopping center nearby.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then the last known original Night Stalker attack was in May 1986.
Right.
Janelle Cruz.
Yes, 18 years old.
She was raped and beaten to death in her house while her family was on vacation.
Right, and a realtor found her body. She was beaten so badly that they found her teeth in her hair and lungs.
That's just horrific.
It is. And they think he used a pipe wrench that was missing from the garage.
Wow. Okay, so that's the end of his known attacks.
Yeah, as far as we know.
But there were other murders that they thought might be connected.
Right, in Visalia and Exeter back in 1974 and 1975.
Okay.
And a murder in Simi Valley in 1978 where a woman and her son were killed.
Right.
But DNA evidence later cleared him in those cases.
Okay, so those were ruled out.
Yep.
They also thought he might be connected to the Mr. Cruel case in Australia.
Right, the child abductions and murders.
Yeah.
But they ruled that out too.
Okay, so it seems like the fact that these three phases were seen as separate things for so long
Oh, yeah.
really slowed down the investigation.
It did. For years, the police were basically looking at three different criminals.
Right. Three different sets of crimes.
Exactly.
And then in 2001, DNA evidence finally connected the East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker.
Right. That was a huge breakthrough.
A huge turning point.
Yeah.
But even before that, some investigators had noticed that the crimes in Goleta were similar.
Right. Goleta's kind of in between the areas where the ERAR and the ONS were active.
Right. Right in the middle.
Yeah. So it makes sense.
Okay, so DNA was crucial.
Absolutely crucial.
And the California DNA database was really important for solving this.
Oh, it was one of the best in the country.
And then we have to talk about Michelle McNamara.
Oh, absolutely.
She was the true crime writer who came up with the name Golden State Killer.
Such a good name.
Chillin', right?
Yeah, it's perfect.
And her research and her work on this case was so important.
She really kept this case alive.
Yeah.
And she pushed for the police to keep looking.
Yeah, she was a huge advocate for the victims.
She was.
So in June 2016, the FBI and local law enforcement announced this big new effort to catch the Golden State Killer.
Okay.
They offered a $50,000 reward.
Wow.
And they released new sketches and information about the crimes.
Trying to get more tips.
Yeah, exactly. And they set up a national database for tips. So this renewed focus, plus the advances in forensic technology, finally led to the break in the case.
So tell me about that. What was the key?
Forensic genetic genealogy.
Wow, that sounds complicated.
It is, but it's really fascinating.
Okay, I'm listening.
So in December 2017, investigators uploaded the killer's DNA profile from a Ventura County rape kit to this genealogy website called GED Match.
Okay.
And this website lets people upload their DNA to find relatives.
Right.
So even though DeAngelo hadn't uploaded his own DNA, they were able to find distant relatives of his through this site.
So they were using other people's DNA to find him.
Exactly. It's like building a family tree, but with DNA instead of names and dates.
Oh, that's incredible.
I know. And they actually built like 25 different family trees.
Wow.
And then they narrowed down the suspects based on things like age, sex, and location.
So it was like a process of elimination.
Yeah, they used all these clues to zero in on DeAngelo.
And this all started with just a DNA sample from a rape kit.
Yeah, it's amazing what they can do with DNA now.
It is truly amazing.
Okay, so once they thought DeAngelo was the guy, they needed to confirm it with his DNA.
Right.
So in April 2018, they got some DNA from him without him knowing.
How'd they do that?
They took it from his car door handle and from his trash.
Oh, wow. Clever.
Yeah, and when they tested those samples, they matched the DNA from the crime scenes.
Bingo.
Exactly, and that also connected him to the Visalia ransacker crimes for the first time.
So everything finally came together.
It did after all those years.
It's hard to believe.
It is, and during the investigation, they looked into a lot of other people.
Like who?
Brett Glasby,
Oh,
Paul Cornfed Schneider,
okay.
Joe Elsip, and Gregory Gonzalez.
Wow, so they really went down a lot of rabbit holes.
So it was a huge investigation.
It makes sense, though, with a case this big.
Right.
Yeah,
So after decades of searching, they finally had their man.
they did.
On April 24th, 2018, Joseph James DeAngelo was arrested at his home in Sacramento.
Wow, what a moment.
I know, he was 72 years old.
72.
Yep. And at first, they charged him with 8 counts of first-degree murder
Okay.
for the killings in Sacramento and Orange County. And then later, they added 4 more counts for murders in Santa Barbara County.
Wow, so a total of 12 murder charges.
Yep.
Okay.
So after he was arrested, he said some strange things.
Like what?
He talked about this inner personality named Jerry, who he said made him commit the crimes.
Really? Like he was blaming someone else?
Yeah. And they recorded him in the interrogation room talking to himself.
What did he say?
He said he didn't have the strength to push Jerry out
Wow.
and that Jerry went with him. And he also admitted that he'd hurt a lot of people and that he had to pay the price now.